If you use an old AST with a fixed term after the commencement date, then you can be fined up to £7,000 for issuing a tenancy agreement with a fixed term in it.
Today's guest is Suzanne Smith, a business lawyer turned property expert who brings a unique dual perspective as both a solicitor with 25 years experience and a hands-on landlord. She's the founder of Suzanne Smith Properties, managing a rental portfolio in Kent, and the voice behind the Independent Landlord, a trusted resource guiding tens of thousands of landlords and property businesses.
Where are we actually at with the EPC updates at this moment?
The first thing is changing the metric and moving away from the flawed system that we know up until now, but moving it on to something where it will take a fabric first approach to the property. And then instead of at the moment where gas boilers do quite well because they're cheap to run, it's going to be taking a more carbon-based approach. But it is all up in the air at the moment because you think you're playing hockey and then all of a sudden it's rugby.
Let's go to that periodic tenancy. What we're saying now is that it's all going to be replaced by a periodic roll-in tenancy. The tenant can end the tenancy at 2 months' notice, so they could move in month 1 and at the end of month 2 they could give their notice. So other things that come in is the digital database.
We'll have to pay for it. It is going to be an offence not to sign up to it and not to keep it up to date, and the landlord and the properties need to have an active entry.
As we've said, there's some changes. Is there anything that a landlord could be doing right now?
Yeah, definitely. The thing about property is that there are so many different strategies.
Building wealth through property isn't about chasing big deals and paydays. It's about owning assets that make money for you consistently. But figuring it all out on your own, that's where most people get stuck. That's why we created this Property Life membership. It's everything we wish we had when we started. Expert guidance, real-world case studies, and a private community of investors actually doing deals, not just talking about them. So you could spend years trying to piece it all together yourself, or you could plug into a system that's already working for our community. Check out our membership page at This Property Life. Everything you need to know is right there. Success is a team sport. Come join in.
In this episode of This Property Life, I'm joined by Suzanne Smith, who is founder of the Independent Landlord, trusted voice in the private rented sector, known for straight-talking content, legal expertise, and her no-nonsense free updates for landlords across the UK. With a 25-year career as a senior in-house lawyer, with a hands-on property portfolio in Kent, Suzanne definitely brings a rare combination of legal clarity and real-world landlord experience to the table. So we're going to dive into the latest EPC updates, the evolving Renters' Rights Bill, breaking down what's fact, what's up in the air, what timelines landlords should actually be paying attention to. So whether you're self-managing or whether you're working with agents or indeed a letting agent, this is a must-listen episode, packed with insights to help you cut through the noise and focus on what really matters. I'm your host, Sarah Blaney, and welcome, Suzanne, to This Property Life.
Thank you. What a great introduction.
Before we jump in, let's tackle one of the biggest hurdles for property investors, finding the best buy-to-let locations for top returns. Over the years, we've helped countless individuals pinpoint the most profitable locations and maximise their rental income. To make it easier for you, we've put together a free guide to buy-to-let hotspots for 2025. Designed specifically for you to understand the market, stay ahead of the trends, and it even includes a list of our top 10 locations in the UK. Get it now for free by clicking the link in the description below and start building your property portfolio today.
More than welcome. Well, I've got a lot to speak about with you because, you know, you've got such a wealth of experience, and I think the coming at it from big corporate career, with the legal expertise that you have and your hands-on experience, you're definitely cutting through a lot of the noise that's in the industry at the moment.
It really was full on corporate. In fact, it was so full on corporate that I didn't have enough room in my head to start property investing until I retired at age 51. So, you know, hats off to anybody who manages to hold down a job and invest at the same time. But companies like GlaxoSmithKline, as it's now called, and big American drug companies, small company that went bust in 2008. That was a startup, and then most recently a biotech company in Cambridge. So yeah, full on corporate, and I'm enjoying the freedom now. 6 years on since I left.
But obviously you're still really busy, but just with a different focus and a slightly different hat on nowadays. So, Suzanne, you've got a big voice in the industry at the moment. You're doing a lot of keynote speeches, and you've got your YouTube channel, and it seems to be a lot focused around what's going on from a legal perspective and a compliance perspective in our property industry at the moment.
Yes, that's right. And the thing is I worked in industry, although I'm a solicitor and got qualified like 1994. I always worked, apart from the first few years, in industry. So I'm used to listening to all the stuff that's going on and then saying, okay, this is what we need to do as a business. And I don't get involved in the, oh, it's not fair bit, because when you're in business, you've just got to get on with it. I leave the campaigning to other people. And that's just, what I've done for 25 years. And when I left corporate, I didn't really know what I was going to do. There was no great plan apart from I just started buying buy-to-lets. And I did a French degree just to kind of amuse myself, full-time French degree, King's College London. And I started buying buy-to-lets and found it really difficult to get reliable advice, because most of what's out there is really generic, and it's a sales funnel for a letting agent or property tech. Was a bit vague on the legal side, but what I've also found is there's some fantastic content out there for investing, but not so much on the mechanics of being a landlord, all the compliance things, all the, how to find good tenants, what you have to do when you self-manage, what's unfair in a contract with a letting agent, when are the renewal fees wrong, when can you challenge them, what you should look out for, all of this kind of stuff. And I started out on Instagram, just in a small key way. I just started doing a few reels and got to meet people and had DMs and from people. And then I thought, why didn't I set up a blog? And that was not even 3 years ago. A friend of mine had done it. And then I just did it and started answering questions that people had. And now almost 3 years later, it's got 10,000 subscribers to my free weekly newsletter, which is really quite something when you think it's almost as many people that fit in Wembley Arena.
That's fantastic. So today, we're going to squeeze a lot in because, we've got you here and it's a once in a lifetime. So I thought I'm going to grill you. So we're going to talk about the EPC updates as we know them at the moment, and also the Renters' Rights Bill, which I think has changed name a few times, but I think it's called the Renters' Rights Bill as we're recording at the moment. But let's go to the EPC. So, over the years, we've had a lot of dates thrown at us and deadlines thrown at us and EPC number or, letters, whether it's going to be a D or an E or a C. Where are we actually at with the EPC updates at this moment?
Yeah, and you're really right to start with EPC, because I think for the average landlord who is a single let landlord with long-term tenants, EPCs are a bigger deal than the Renters' Rights Bill, because what is happening at the moment is the government has been out to consultation about two things. The first thing is changing the metrics and moving away from the flawed system that we know up until now, but moving it onto something where take a fabric first approach to the property. And then instead of at the moment where gas boilers do quite well because they're cheap to run, it's going to be looking more at taking more carbon-based approach. So there may well be properties, that I have Victorian houses. They've all got EPC Cs. Some of them are really marginal, 70, and it starts at 69. So some of them are a bit marginal. And if the rules change next year when they're supposed to be coming into effect, who knows whether my properties will still be an EPC C then. So there's a separate consultation that the government is going to increase the minimum energy efficiency standards from E, as it is at the moment, to a C by 2028 for new tenancies, and then 2030 for existing tenancies. And that will be on the new system. And because when the Renters' Rights Bill comes into effect, we'll all be 2 months away from a notice to quit. And so tenants leaving, it means if we're wanting to stay as landlords, then we'll need to be ready from 28. There are apparently going to be some transition arrangements, a grandfathering system where if you're an EPC C when the new rules the new metrics come in next year, then you will keep that EPCC until it expires. And so I would be getting new EPCCs next year just to try and extend that. But it is all a bit up in the air at the moment, because we don't, it's like you're playing football and you know that there's a goal vaguely in that direction, and you're kicking a ball, but you don't know where the goalposts are, let alone moving the goalposts. We just don't know where they are.
The ball might change shape halfway through your dribble.
That's a really good analogy. Yeah, you think you're playing hockey, and then all of a sudden it's rugby.
Well, that is kind of how it's felt for the last, couple of years. And I know as a landlord myself, I've gone, oh, I need to worry about this. And then I'm like, I don't know what I'm worrying about yet, because it's not, it keeps changing. The goalpost, as you said, keeps changing. And I think that's the trouble for a lot of landlords. It's, something's happening, you need to pay attention to it, maybe do something about it. But then when you dig in, you realise that the information isn't there for you to make an informed decision. You back away, and then sometimes you come back to it too late.
Yeah, and there are some grants available at the moment for landlords. If you have a tenant who's on a low income, or they get universal credit, there's something called the Warm Homes Local Grant that you can get up to 15,000 for the first property, and then 50% afterwards, to help go towards improving the EPC of the building. But of course, that's on the old system, not on the new system. We don't know what the new system is. But I think if somebody does manage to get a grant, they should make sure that they've got insulation in the loft. They look at their windows. I wouldn't be replacing any boilers until we know about the new system, unless you're going to be putting in electric. But again, we don't know what the new system is, and it is concerning. And I'm hoping that the government will see reason over it. I know a lot of people have written in about it as part of the consultation. We can but hope.
Okay, if we're all going to go heat sourced air pumps, whether they be air or ground, a lot of properties aren't suitable for ground. Equally so, that they are large at the moment. Not every property is actually going to be able to do this, and we haven't got the labour, to be able to do it either. I've recently had some plumbing work done on my own home, and having spoken to lots of different plumbers where I live, which is an area where people can afford to put the heat source pumps in, and even with the grants, it's still an expensive thing. A lot of the plumbers are like, I'm not touching it yet. Not going there, don't trust it. They don't do what the job's supposed to do. And then there's a couple that have gone jumping in on that, and they're going for it. So I don't even know that we're going to have the qualified labour to be able to implement.
Another thing to bear in mind, based on the consultation at the moment, is that landlords won't have to spend more than £15,000. That's the proposed amount. And then the more affordable ones will be 10,000, which is still a lot of money if the house is worth, say, £100,000, and you're not going to get your money back. Because if you get a grant, you can't increase the rent as a result of the the energy efficiency improvements. So I think for landlords at the moment, no, it's coming. If you're near a C, it might be worth doing a little bit just to get it up to a C, and then you benefit from the grandfathering for 10 years. And if you've got a C already, get it extended, but use the same. Get it renewed, but use the same person as before, so they don't then downgrade it, because hopefully they'll keep the same. They'll have the same assumptions, and that's all we can do, and just put it on the back burner.
So basically, let's sum it up: get your insulation done, look at your windows, look at your current EPC and look at what they're suggesting. Get it renewed so that you are part of that grandfather rights, because generally they're 10 years for the expiry of the EPC.
That's if you're a C. Yeah, if and you're nowhere near a C, then I would wait, because the other thing is this £15,000 cost cap. The clock only starts from that next year. So if you spend money now, and say you're going to be spending 20,000. That would be out of scope until next year. So the whole thing's a bit of a mess, really. And I'm not one for hyperbole. I don't go on about things. I don't exaggerate. I mean that very genuinely.
Okay. All right. So what we have on the renters rights bill is a little bit more formalised, isn't it?
Yes. So as we're recording this at the end of May, it's still in the House of Lords. It's just finished the committee stage. It's about to start. Well, we don't yet know. It's due to start the report stage when probably sometime in June. And that's when all the big debates come, because I think there are a lot of people that were expecting these 300 amendments that have been tabled that would somehow get into the bill at the committee stage. That never happens at the committee stage. It's just a kind of a lot of prodding and pushing the government to see if they're going to change anything. So what we're waiting for now is to see whether the government comes back with any amendments. I think I described it in my newsletter last week. It's squeaky bum time, because you're going to be having this kind of because the Labour government doesn't have a majority in the House of Lords, so it's highly likely that some amendments will get into the bill. Get voted into the bill that the government doesn't like. And then you have this thing called ping pong, where it goes backwards and forwards between the House of Commons. And so if people can persuade the government to accept some of the amendments, then they'll get into the bill. If not, ultimately, because it's a manifesto bill and the government has a large majority in the House of Commons, what the government wants to get in the bill will be the version of the bill. So there will be a lot of yakety yak and we're doomed, we're saved, depending which way you're looking at it in the next stage of the bill. But that's not the bit of the bill that counts, the report stage. What counts is the final version that gets royal assent. And the government has said they're not backing down on fixed terms, and they're not backing down on the abolition of Section 21, because that's in the long title of the bill. And if they were to change that, they'd have to change the title. And also it's a manifesto pledge. Not that necessarily means anything. Governments often don't follow through with manifesto pledges, but they seem to want to get this one onto the statute book.
I guess people in the industry who have the viewpoint that because nothing's been ticked with its, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, that we don't know. But you're saying actually that's not true. And because they have the majority in the House of Commons, there might be slight amendments, but ultimately what we see in front of us at the moment is probably what we're going to get.
I always think it's best to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And so if you plan for the worst case scenario and you get your head around how's it going to affect your business, if you're a student landlord, what are you going to do? You're going to start the tenancies earlier. If they leave in May, that it's or Easter, it's okay. Are you going to look at doing short-term lets over the summer? There are all sorts of different things to do. And if you at the moment accept rent in advance, which you're not going to be able to, will you have professional guarantors? There are all these sorts of things that we need to be thinking about how it's going to affect us. If you've got damp and mold, get to the bottom of it, because we don't know when it's going to come into effect, but there are going to be stricter rules. And make sure you understand the rules, because there are really big penalties. And let me give you a very good example of one. So the commencement date, which is when the new assured tenancy system will come into effect. Once that has passed, if you use an old AST with a fixed term after the commencement date, you use it accidentally, say you're a self-managing landlord, or even if you're a letting agent who's not got up to speed with all of the details, then you can be fined up to £7,000 for issuing a tenancy agreement with a fixed term in it. And there are so many complicated rules for rent and how much you can charge for the initial one and when you can invoice them and all this sort of thing. So it's really important to understand what the rules are. And I would say if you're using letting agents, make sure you understand them yourself, because most of the penalties will come against the landlord, even if it's the agent who makes the mistake. And so that's why, I've been putting so much content out. I've got a video I put out last week called The Renters' Rights Bill in 10 Minutes. And if you listen to that, you'll get most of it. Even if you remember half of it, then that will be helpful. And I think we just all need to be informed. And if the government does back down on a couple of small things, then, yippee. But I think it's far better to, as I said, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, rather than just kind of,
Okay, so let's go to that periodic tenancy. So at the moment we can do 6 month fixed, we can do 12-month fixed, we can kind of do whatever, and we can do 6 months with periodic. But what we're saying now is that it's all going to be replaced by a periodic rolling tenancy.
Yeah.
The tenant can end the tenancy 2 months notice, so they could move in month 1, and at the end of month 2 they could give their notice.
Well, they could give their notice immediately
and move out after the 60 days or 2 months.
The notice has to coincide with the end of a rent period. And that's another thing. A rent period will have to be no more than 1 month. So they could move in. The day they move in, they serve notice, and then they can move out 2 months later. I mean, I think it's unlikely to happen for most properties. If you're in a town centre location that's very popular with Airbnb and you've got summer, then that is a risk. And I know there are landlords who offer furnished properties, and they're now going to take out the furniture. So then it will make it harder for somebody to let it on a short-term basis. It's trickier for HMO landlords. They might want to have, they like to curate a house, so all the people living together, kind of co-living approach, get on with each other, and they have that 6-month kind of stability for new tenants coming in, and that will go. And because HMOs tend to offer a fully furnished, there may well be more turnover for HMOs. So it means in your tenant selection, really double down on finding, are they really wanting to be here for the long term? Are they here on a work placement? Are they here for studying? Really find out, are they genuinely a long-term tenant? And then really focus on keeping tenants happy.
That really needs to pay attention to this periodic tenancy, as you say, and I think that is likely to attract someone who wants to come for a couple of months to a place, whether it's an overseas person. Obviously there's the right to rent that we all have to abide by. Yeah, I think that there's definitely a way that Airbnb niche targets tenants could also, or not tenants, but guests could make use of this. And then there's HMOs, and then there's obviously the student HMOs, which is even probably more likely to a canny student, once they've given the word around, is going to be like, hey, we don't have to pay summer rent anymore, and hey, we can leave in April when our Easter exams are done. Yeah, it's going to have an effect on those areas, I think, quite a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, particularly for students, because I foresee that students will leave before the Easter holidays and come back and stay in Airbnbs. And so then what do the landlords do? Do they just charge more for the first 2 terms? Because universities, they only do teaching for 2 terms, and then there's the exams and et cetera, et cetera. And I know some landlords are talking about starting the tenancies earlier, so starting in June or July. So at least they've got that bit covered, because the student landlords have their fixed outgoings, and their need to, they've done they've done the numbers on the basis that they will get a certain amount of money a year. And at the moment it's fairly predictable, because you get a group of students moving in on a joint tenancy. So if one of them drops out, the rest of them are liable for the rent. They're then really incentivized to find someone else. Whereas if you have a joint tenancy in the new system and someone serves, they will be able to serve notice because there's no fixed term. And so and then if they serve notice, it will terminate the thing for the whole joint tenancy. And there's no incentive for the students to try and find someone else. So I suspect that student landlords will do room let, and there'll be more coming and going. And it's going to be harder to be a student landlord, more management. But then people need to start to think about this, and if it turns out that the government does a U-turn, then all well and good. But I think it's far better to start thinking about how are we going to manage this, rather than leaving it to the last minute. But another question is, I don't think it's going to come into effect this year. So I know that, well, initially the government said it would come into effect by the summer, but at the moment, because there are 2 big stages in the House of Lords still to go, the report stage and the third reading, and then there's this ping pong thing between the House of Commons, and we've only got June and half of July, 6 weeks, And that is very, very tight to get all of that done, to get raw assent before the summer. So I suspect that the raw assent will be after the summer. And then hopefully the government will give at least 6 to 12 months notice of the new system coming in. Because, there's a lot of work that has to be done. Software has to be rewritten. Books have to be published. People need to be trained. And from my own conversations with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, MHCLG, they really want to succeed. And there's going to be a big education campaign going out to landlords, explaining what they need to do, and to tenants, and to make sure that everybody's aware of the rules. So because they're not wanting to catch landlords out, they're wanting landlords to comply with the new rules. And I think that's a message that gets missed in social media. They just think, the government's hates landlords and has got it in for them. I think that, whilst, who knows, that may be true, but the real purpose of the bill is to bring in these reforms. And there's a success if landlords understand the new rules and follow them, and that there's more freedom for tenants. That's the policy decision behind it. When I was talking to them a couple of weeks ago, they said they're going to be taking out print media, adverts, buses, all this kind of thing, to make sure that landlords understand the rules, because there's not been a huge amount of talk about it. And there are 2.4 million landlords. I think there's about 110,000 belong to the NRLA. So that's 95% of landlords don't belong to a landlord association. About half don't use letting agents. And then not all the letting agents will be any good anyway. The property mark ones will have had good training, and some of the other good independent ones will have. But there's no qualifications for letting agents. Anyone can set up. So unless your letting agents know all the rules, it's going to be tricky. So there's this huge number of landlords who've got no idea of the ins and outs of the rules. And the government is going to try and reach out to them and explain new rules to them.
For the vast majority, it's going to be probably okay. But there are going to be, I think, pockets of the country, and I'm looking at London, really, some of the bigger cities specifically, where that Airbnb grey area will really, I think it will be quite messy. And I wonder how the lenders are going to react to this, because if you have a house which someone takes on a tenancy, a week later they put their 2 months notice in because actually they were only over here for a 2-month holiday in London, and then that house is continually almost rented out as a short stay operator, but they have a buy-to-let mortgage, and the neighbours are like, but there's different people coming every 2 months, and they talk to the council, who talk to the lender. I can imagine that in these kind of hotbed activity areas, it's going to become a bit messy.
Yeah, and so I think that landlords would take the furniture out because that's the easiest thing, and it's a kind of the law of unintended consequences. But I think that the majority of tenants don't want to move in and do Airbnb because they'd have to pay a deposit, go through referencing, and all this kind of thing. And this is why it's really, really important to double down on your tenant selection, even if you use agents, to find out, are they really wanting to stay here for a long time? Where are they from? Why are they coming here? It's because that is a risk. I mean, for places where I let, like Maidstone, I mean, it's not really a place where people go on holiday. I mean, there's Leeds Castle, but I'm not near Leeds Castle.
Yeah.
And Leeds Castle, that's the Kent version, not the Yorkshire version. I have long-term tenants. Most of them are on periodic tenancies anyway. I give them the choice, and they've been there for years and years. And so for me, I can't really see it's going to be a big deal because it's, apart from having to sign up for the database and the ombudsman and me, well, I already use Section 13 to do the rent increases anyway, and I keep them reasonable. So I allow pets. I accept people who are on universal credit. So as long as they have good references and they pass credit checks. So for me, I can't see it's going to be a big deal.
And as usual, yeah.
And it seems to be I'm almost the only person that's relaxed about the Renters' Rights Bill. I mean, apart from, I understand that HMOs and student landlords, but for the vast majority of landlords, which is, is probably like 90% of landlords are in the single let space, roughly. And there's so much negativity online and so much fear, and it's become a big political football, and between both sides, the tenant lobby and the landlord lobby. And every time somebody says, oh, I've read something and then I won't say which publications, I'm not even going to read it because I know it's not true, and they're just doing it for clickbait.
Yeah. So I think I totally agree with you on that one, Suzanne. I was like looking through some of the headlines as I know them, and you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but rent increases. I do as you do. I do a Section 13. It's only allowed once a year. It has to be in line with market rate. And I have one tenant that I have inherited who, when I put through my Section 13, will always go to the rent tribunal because she just loves that sort of thing. She knows she can, and she just thinks, why not? I'm going to do it every single time. And sometimes it happens quickly and we get to a figure that we both agree on. That they basically say, right, it's at this. And I kind of go, yeah, I was expecting that. And she's probably the same. Sometimes it can take a year and she doesn't pay that amount for a year, but then she pays it all in one go because she was expecting it. So for me,
and that's going to change in the Renters' Rights Bill, is if they challenge it, the rent increase won't come into effect until afterwards. So there'll be no back.
There's no back date.
Yeah. So she will be delighted because she will delay her rent increase. But I think that this will just increase. If you go and negotiate with her and you say, I'm wanting to increase it by 5%, the market is way above, and she comes back and says 3%, and you agree that, then you can lock that down. And I think that that's what landlords will have to do. But most of my tenants, it depends how recently they moved in, they're either at market or near. And for some of my longer term ones, I put it up roughly between the lower of CPIH inflation, that's the Consumer Prices Index inflation with housing costs, and wage inflation. So the year when CPIH was like 10%, I put it at a low amount, which was wage inflation, because people say, oh, I don't put rents up. But if you don't put them up when there's inflation, you're decreasing it. And then it gets to the point where all the costs go up. And then you're wondering why you're not making any money, and the rent is reduced by a huge amount, and then a landlord puts it up by 20-30% in one go and wonders why the tenant's upset. And it's far better just to put it up little and often. That's going to be something that landlords will need to find out about, how to.
So I think the action on that one possibly could be, look at what's in your tenancy now, look at when you did last put the rent up, and just diarise and, talk to your letting agents, if you're self-managing, talk to your tenant and say, this is what is going to happen, and lots of notice. I think we're going to have to give 2 months notice, but I think most people give 2 months notice anyway. So for me, that rent increase part of the Renters' Rights Bill hasn't really changed, I don't think. I mean, not from my practical use.
Well, that's, you take a very professional approach, whereas a lot of people, they want to keep the tenants and don't want to upset the tenants. But if you always from the start put it up by a small amount and you talk to them first, so I intend to do the inspection just over 2 months before the rent is due. I chat to them about it and say, oh, well, look, I can keep it down at this amount, which is below the market. And then they're fine. And they say, is that fair? Yeah, that's fair. And I send them the Section 13 notice, Form 4. And it's just not a big deal. I've never had any tenant pushback, and I haven't always put the rent up. Like in COVID, I didn't put it up because it, seemed a bit, at the time.
So I agree.
Otherwise, I do put it up every year.
Do you write into your ASTs that you will look at the CPIH, or is that just something that that's what you do?
Yeah, I don't have rent review clauses, and rent review clauses, they have pluses and minuses, and I just do what's fair and reasonable. And I can increase it every year because I can just serve Section 13 notice. And when the new Renters' Rights Bill comes into effect, any rent review clauses will be null and void anyway. So I just try and do something. Often when I'm making decisions, I think, well, I have adult children who are both renters, and I think I see it through their eyes, saying, well, what would they say is fair and reasonable? If I'm putting it up by 2-3%, that's fair and reasonable when inflation's 3.5%. So I think just don't do it all in one big go, because that's the sort of thing that got the that is getting the bad press and getting the rest of us good landlords into a bad situation, or the landlords who may be not kept up to date with their rent increases and then have just done it 50% and then wonder why everybody's upset about it.
Yes, yeah, I think you're right. It is those rogue ones, I suppose, or some of the headline landlords.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily a rogue doing that. It's just, I think there've been quite a lot of people that just didn't realize how far their rents had got behind the market, and then their mortgage costs went up, and they think, oh, I need to do something about it. Yeah, and so it's more, I think, taking a more professional approach, treating it like a business. We all have to be professional. It doesn't mean having a lot of properties. I don't have a lot of properties, but I'm really professional in the way I run them.
Yeah. So other things that are in the bill that we've looked at, there's pet requests, not being able to discriminate against anyone who's on universal credit. I mean, I know that the pet requests, it's not official, but at the moment you still, you can still, people can ask for pets, and it's not that you can say they are banned. You can just choose not to take them. But my buy-to-lets, if they're a house, I'd say always pets allowed, if they tend to stay for longer, if it's a home.
And you can charge more because they're more popular. I have pets in most of my properties, and there's more. I find there's been more damage from just ordinary human wear and tear. And if you look for good, responsible tenants who look after the property and they're good, the sorts of tenants that you want, they're more likely to have a dog or a cat that they look after. And I wouldn't let somebody who's out at work all day and they have a dog. And I think that would be entirely reasonable. Well, I wouldn't allow them to have a pet. It's entirely reasonable to say no. And you can say no to requests for pets. So if your lease prohibits it, or the freeholder says it doesn't give consent, then that's a good reason to say no. And if people have too many cats or too many dogs, then that's another good reason to say no. I've written quite a lot about this, but I'm very much in favor of pets. Mostly, well, I never used to be. My children told me, well, if you don't, first of all, it's really unfair that we we can't have a cat or a dog. It's really good for mental health. And if you don't allow it, then tenants will do it anyway, and they'll just take them out for a walk when there's an inspection. And so I'd actually rather be upfront about it. They do tend to stay for longer because it's more of a home for them. That I want my tenants to put down roots there. I don't want them to move out ever. And if having a dog helps them do that, and someone's got a dog and a cat, then I'm fine by that.
Yeah, but within the renters' rights bill, they can always request, and you have a certain amount of time, I believe, to actually come back on that. And as you say, as long as there's a valid reason why you're not doing that or not allowing it, say the freeholder or your lease, or that there is shared space. So I have a multi-unit block where there is a shared courtyard between 6 different users, and it's small. So I wouldn't put pets in that situation, especially on the upper floors, because I just don't think that's conducive for everybody within that shared space. So those reasons would still be valid.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think give reasons, and I know we're going to get some guidance, but it's a very elastic concept, reasonableness under the law, because it depends on the situation. It would depend on the situation, but that seems like an entirely reasonable approach to me.
So other things that come in is the digital database. So it's a free property portal that we all have to then be
part of. We'll have to pay for it.
I will have to pay for it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the government's not going to pay for the running of it. We don't know what's going to be in it, but I imagine it will be things like gas safety certificate, EPCs, and EICRs, and some other information. And it is going to be an offence not to sign up to it and not to keep it up to date. And the landlord and the properties need to have an active entry. And if you own some through a limited liability company and some in your own name, then you have to have 2 registrations. And so it will be a big deal, and you would have to pay up to 7,000 fine for not keeping it up to date, etc. So there are quite a lot of rules to do with that, because what they're trying to do with the database is to make it easy for councils to enforce all the laws. And at the moment, they don't really know who is what properties are a landlord and what aren't. And there are lots of illegal HMOs and even just like, I bought a property a few years ago that had tenants in it, and the EICR was unsatisfactory, and they'd been living in there for 6 months, and the landlord hadn't paid for the electric upgrades. And there was no way that the local authority would know about that, because the local authority wouldn't necessarily know it's tenanted, and there's no central database of EICRs for them to check. I was horrified when I saw that, but that, and that was a big landlord who was selling up his portfolio, and so much for professional landlords. That big landlords are professional. It's very much depends on the individual people.
Is that going to be a national database that we will all be part of? So we'll be uploading our documents the way that we do if we've got HMOs, that we do it for our HMO application, obviously only once every whatever time period the application's up for. But this will have to be an annual, because some of these things are annual. EICRs are 5 years, but gas safes are every year. So it's going to have to be a manual operation.
Yeah. What we don't know is whether they're going to create new gas safety certificates that are like EPCs and just do like a data feed. I don't know. I don't think it's going to come into effect for a while. So I really wouldn't worry about it too much at the moment. We'll just comply with it when it comes out. I'm not spending any time worrying about it. It's more the whole tenancy system that's moving onto periodics and all the other rules that I think are front
I'm
and
just
center.
thinking of an opportunity for landlords, like a lot of good landlords out there, because there's a lot of accidental landlords out there who have moved in with a partner. Their house is now, empty. They rent it out. They might not tell HMRC about that rental income. They might still be on their residential mortgage. They might then sell that property and not pay the level of tax that we would pay if we were to sell our property. So presumably that national portal, if that's a mandatory thing, you would imagine that those people will kind of look at all of this and go, this all seems a bit hard. I'm going to get out whilst I can.
Yeah, well, and another thing is that you're not going to be able to let a property on any of the portals or anywhere without being on the database. And so if they go to a letting agent or even like Open Rent and try and put it onto Rightmove and Zoopla, they're not going to be able to advertise it without an active entry. And yes, there may well be landlords selling up. And I think those of us who get our heads around it and decide, okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time getting to understand the rules, and they're not so bad when once you've understood them, then there will be opportunities, because I'm sure there will be more landlords selling up.
I think so, and especially because I bet that data will be shared with HMRC, and lenders as a interested party will probably have access to that, like they do HMO registers. So I think there'll be a little bit of a tightening, won't there, at that level?
Yeah, well, we don't yet know that. And what we also don't know is whether we're going to have to put our home addresses, because I know for HMOs, it's a big bugbear that they get all this junk mail from people because they got their address from the HMO register. We don't actually know. And certainly I sent in a submission to the government on this and said not everybody should have access to our addresses because of the amount of spam and privacy, etc.
Well, a lot of the councils will redact that information. You have to actually pay for it in any case. So, yeah, I think that probably a lot of councils will do a similar thing, or obviously it's a national level, so they'll probably do a similar thing just to get that money. So, actually, some of these things aren't big changes, and if you're doing it right in the first instance, it's just an extra little thing to make sure that you're complying with. That you probably are. You just haven't formalised it in that manner. So other things, I guess the big one is the Section 21. In your experience of being a landlord, Suzanne, have you actually issued a Section 21?
Yeah, that's such a good angle. I have once, because I had a flat. It was my accidental landlord flat. The service charge had gone up, and my yield was like 3 point something. I could see that the property had not gone up in value, even though it was brick, I decided to draw a line under it, sell it. I sold it in 2022, just about broke even. And I had lovely tenants in there. They'd been there for 2 years. I gave them 6 months informal notice and then served a Section 21 notice. They asked if they could stay a few weeks longer to dovetail with their next flat. I gave them a wonderful reference because they were wonderful people. And that was it. No drama. And I think and that often happens is that when landlords serve Section 21 notices, that the tenants just move out. And the time that they don't is if they're in rent arrears, or maybe there's antisocial behaviour, so the more kind of problematic end of the market. But a lot of, like one of my daughters, she's had 2 Section 21 notices. In one, it was they were selling up, and another one, they were wanting a family to move in. So these are things that will still be that will be added to Section 8. So we'll still be able to use those no fault evictions. And she just moved out. She was upset about it, and it was stressful, but she moved out. And I think most people do that. The majority of landlords probably never serve a Section 21 notice, and there's been so much focus on it. And to me, it's kind of almost like and another news type of thing. Whereas the real important thing is understanding about the fixed terms, and tenants can serve notice at any time with 2 months notice, that the rules, no rent in advance, and the rules about putting up rent, all of that kind of thing. That's more important because that's going to affect every landlord, and we've got to get it right. Whereas the theoretical possibility that you might want to evict a tenant is less of a thing. And of course, with Section 21, if they don't move out when the notice expires, you've still got to go to court anyway. And so it's not like you can then go in and change the locks. It just means that the court process is a little bit shorter because you're not having to prove that you qualify for one of the grounds. You just have to show that you've served your gas safeties and the deposit and all that type of thing. And the judge doesn't have any discretion. So I might not be very popular for saying this, but I just don't get the focus on this when there's a lot of other things in the bill I think will affect every single landlord.
I completely agree with you. I think not many people serve Section 21s. And when they do, it's perhaps as your children have experienced that, someone is selling or that they want to move a family member in. And that is allowed in any case with this new bill. There's a time period. I think it's 12 months at the moment. And, that's okay. That's fair enough. I personally don't think this is a big deal at all. And I think what you've spoken about at various points during our chat today is the tenant selection. And, tenant selection is a really important part of this. And if you find out their intentions, as we've said about the whole periodic tenancy roll-in, you're in a better position, aren't you, of having someone that you really don't need to use a no fault eviction to get out. And actually the Section 8 will help you to get them out if you need to.
And also with tenants won't be able to pay rent in advance. And I know that's popular in particular for people who have overseas students, but I would never let to somebody who needed to pay rent in advance to get through the tenant referencing. I want somebody who will pass tenant referencing, who has enough money, and so I can get rent guarantee insurance. I don't want to have a situation where I've just got to trust that in a year's time they'll be able to afford it just because they paid rent in advance. And even when I had I let to a family who came over to the UK from abroad, and I could have asked them for rent in advance, but I didn't, because I could see that he was coming over on a clever person's visa, and he had a really good job. And I believed that they were, that they would pay the rent on time and would want to build up a credit history. And they were never even one day late paying the rent. I didn't take out rent guarantee insurance because, I didn't take out rent guarantee insurance for them. It was a couple of years ago now, but I didn't. I didn't ask for rent in advance because my judge of character, having met them and doing my due diligence online, I thought they seemed like a good risk, and they were.
I guess the properties that, I always say to people, if you don't like the type of tenant you're going to get by buying that particular house, don't buy that particular house.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Because you have to have the appetite for the person that you're renting to. And, clearly in your case, people you're renting to, you can have that, afford that luxury of how do I feel about them? Is my gut feel that this is going to happen? And I think the majority of my tenants would very much fall into that as well, even though it's in a cheaper area up in the northwest. But of course, there are areas, in the northeast and various places around the country where the property price is a lot cheaper, the rent is a lot less, and the type of tenant you get might not pass your spider sense. So for that type of landlord, it probably is a little bit more of a big deal.
Yes, it is. And I think that, they're the tenants that should be in social housing. And, I've decided to do a different section, but, still, I'm not in an expensive part of London. Where I let, it's a working part of Maidstone. The people who I let to aren't lawyers and accountants and doctors. They're people with normal jobs. And I want to let to local people because they're more likely to stay. And I have never had one day's rent arrears in all the time. I mean, in 6 years, and I've had 5 properties, not one day's rent arrears. And I self-manage. They know I fix things when things are broken. And I decided to buy near where I live so I can nip round. It's easy. And I would like this. I've just put out on Instagram with the hook saying, when did you last check your chimneys? Because one of my chimneys, the next door neighbor, they'd been putting in a log burner, and their person who did that looked over our chimney and said it was in a real state. And so I've now had it fixed. And that, to repoint a chimney, put lead flashing around, put cowls above the 4 chimney pots, that cost about 2 months gross rent in the south of England. I think up north, even if the labour is a little bit cheaper up north, that might be a couple of years' rent. And that's, you need to have a sinking fund. And that's why I prefer to have fewer properties, because to repoint a chimney and to replace, I think they replaced like 10 bricks or something. It was quite a big job. The cost wouldn't be that much different in somewhere where maybe the property cash flows £100 a month, as opposed to what I get, which I don't disclose, but it's more than that.
Yeah. So I think, potentially, and we'll perhaps have a conversation when 2 years, 3 years time, when all this is bedded down, this could have a consequence for lower socioeconomic areas where the rent isn't as high, the tenant type is of a certain profile. And I don't know, my gut feel on that is that it will be the tenant worst party in it.
I think quite a lot of people are thinking of leasing their properties to local authorities for social housing. And something will happen because people will need somewhere to live. And but for me personally, that's not the end of the market that I focus on quite deliberately. I'd rather just have a small number of properties and look after them and have them near where I live, rather than having to spend all day to drive somewhere to see something that's gone wrong. It's the opportunity cost of my time. And then when you buy properties that are at the other end of the country, you have to use letting agents, or you're more likely to. Everything, you've got all of those indirect costs because it's not you doing it. It's not like I can nip down and get out my sealant gun and do it myself if something needs doing, rather than paying somebody to do it. But the thing about property is that there are so many different strategies, and what I have suits me because I want a low effort way of doing it. I'm 57. I don't want a big property empire. I'm not looking to grow. And so I'm quite happy just with my 4 houses that I've got now. Whereas other people have are trying to do different things, and then that's right for them. So just because I do it, this is what I'm doing, doesn't mean it's wrong or it's the right approach for everybody else. It's just right for me at my stage of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, it's all about personal goals, isn't it? And whether what you're doing is serving them well. But I do have a little niggle that there is going to be an unintended consequence that will be bad news for a certain tenant profile. And we'll see what
but
happens.
hopefully the government will build more social housing and change the rules so they stop being sold off. That's the problem. I blame Margaret Thatcher for all this, for the right to buy, and the rules that meant that there was no incentive for local authorities to keep building new properties because people would buy them at a discount. And so the people who, when I was young would have qualified for social housing don't anymore. And I think that's the real problem that needs to be addressed, and hopefully it will be, but who knows.
Yeah, well, maybe this bill might force in certain areas, will then build another policy of, as you say, an increase in social housing, which I think is absolutely needed. So yeah, anyway, we've said Section 21, not such a big deal. Section 8 is going to cover that. The 2-month notice period, the rolling periodic, that's a bigger deal. Other things, property condition and reporting of that property, dampened. And condensation is a bane of every landlord's life in rental. And there's a constant battle, isn't there, between open a window, ventilate, and actually this is a fabric of the building problem. So I think, there's going to be a lot of damp specialists who are going to get rich out of that one. So maybe that's...
And also, the law's not really changing that much because we've already got these duties to keep the building in repair. I just think it's going to have more focus, and there are going to be time limits, but we don't know what they're going to be, and it will be longer than it is for social housing. We'll have to investigate issues within a certain amount of time. But damp and mold is really difficult. It's like whack-a-mole. You think you fixed it, and then you realise there's another problem. And even with tenants who do heat the property and do open the windows, there might be a leak from somewhere. I've had a problem in one of mine. It's not a big problem with damp and mold, but we think there's been water penetration through the render on the side of the building. So I've been trying to sort that out. And, luckily it's not in any of the bedrooms. It's just a small bit in the kitchen, but I still want to get to the bottom of it because it's not good to have a wet building.
No, it's not good.
As a landlord, you want to sort it out if it is a problem with the fabric of the building. And nowadays you can get these sensors to see whether it is because the property's not heated properly or they're not opening the windows if the humidity is too high and things. So I'm sure there'll be lots of companies selling that so we can actually find out the real reason that there's mold rather than... I think sometimes there's too much victim blaming, tenant blaming, saying it's tenant lifestyle, whereas often it isn't. And sometimes and then if it is, then landlords need to educate the tenants and to be sensitive and nice about it, to explain dew point and why they should open their windows for 5 minutes a day, and how that won't actually reduce the temperature, and it's good because you want to be having dry air inside, not wet air, all of that sort of thing. And so
so as we've said, there's some changes. It's definitely come in. The date is, as you've said, a little bit more up in the air. That's probably the one unknown. What we're seeing as those main facts are what we're going to get pretty much. That's the bottom line. So is there stuff apart from, I guess, tenant selection, thinking about that side of thing? And if you're going to be buying, making sure that the tenant profile that you're going to be targeting is the one that you have the appetite for. Is there anything else that a landlord could be doing right now?
I mean, really going on inspections and having a look, and just with a critical eye, is there anything that needs to be sorted? Because we're going to be having the decent home standard. And I say this particularly for people who leave it all to letting agents. When letting agents go around and look at a property, they're mostly looking for tenant breach rather than the fabric of the building and things. When I go around, I think, oh, that needs repointing. Oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. Look at, I'm not looking at it for what's the tenant done wrong, because, mostly they haven't. It's more, I have a long-term approach to my properties, and I want to solve problems, head off problems before they become a problem. And so the chimney done recently. I did a really proper job with the lead flashing and the cows and all this sort of thing. I didn't just bodge it. I wanted something that's going to a repair or redoing the chimney. It's going to last 30 years. Then I won't have to do it again. I won't have all the water coming in, etc., etc. And I think that we should all have a short-term and a long-term maintenance schedule, like you do if you've got a block, if you're a freeholder. You look at and have a sinking fund as you would if you're a freeholder and of a block, and just think about it. It's not passive income. It's even a car you get serviced. And so houses, you need to look after them, have that baked into your numbers, that that you're going to have to put money aside. My problem children pop up in different years. So like there's one property that's had lots and lots of things go wrong with it this year. The last year it's been absolutely fine. And then one that's been brilliant, and I had almost no money spent on it for the last few years. Now that's the one that I've had to pay 2 months rent on getting the chimneys. I think checking the condition of the property, talking to tenants, explaining to them about the Renters' Rights Bill coming in, that they don't need to worry about it, that we'll have to put them onto periodic if they're on fixed term, that they shouldn't worry about that. I'm long term, I'm not going to be selling up. And just having, the other thing is focus on, we're in a service business, we're not selling widgets. And happy tenants make happy landlords. They stay longer, they pay the rent on time, there's better communication, they let you in for repairs and inspections. And so I think do everything that you can to have happy tenants. Now, it doesn't mean being a pushover, because there are sometimes tenants want things that are unreasonable, and I say no to tenants sometimes when they want to do something, but I just try and be fair and reasonable. So I guess that's a few more tips.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously, if anyone wants to find out more about the bill as it progresses through the ping pong that we've discussed today, your website and your newsletter that comes out every week is a great place to start.
Yes, and they can find that. It's very easy. I mean, even if you put Suzanne and Landlord into Google, you'll find me as number one. But it's the independentlandlord.com, and you put that onto YouTube. I've got a load of content out there and free training on the Renters' Rights Bill. I've had tens of thousands of people do it on YouTube, and I enjoy explaining it to people, and because I want to help landlords. It's part of me paying forward. I don't charge landlords for any of the content at all. Nothing is behind a paywall. The way I make my money is by providing services to the companies that offer services to landlords. YouTube has turned out to be content marketing, and then I make my money around the edges, but not from landlords. I'm kind of adamant, and I'm not covering the blog in adverts. I've just only got 3 very small adverts in the sidebar, and because I want to do a good thing here and help landlords through this difficult period of time with very independent advice, and not trying to sell something.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. So if you do want some good content on the actual facts around lots of different things, but very much about the renters EPC stuff that's coming in, or, we'll see on that one. That's a little bit more grey at the moment. But do go to Suzanne's website, which is the Good Landlord. Is that right? The Independent Landlord.
The independentlandlord.com.
Independent Landlord. And there's lots of good information. And I subscribe and I get your email every week. And it's a good source of information. So thank you so much, Suzanne, for your time today. I've learned a few things, and I hope that people are less worried about the change. Everyone hates change, but actually, when we boil it down, the change isn't that big. And some of the change that you're focusing on, probably not the stuff that you should be focusing on. So it is one of those. Keep an eye on the news, go to the good facts and see where we're at the moment, and make good decisions around that. But please don't worry. Property is a long-term game, and that's what it's all about.
Well, very well said.
Thanks, Suzanne.